Hey everyone, Sean Rhodes here, Chief Sales Sergeant at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. In case you haven't figured it out yet, you're on the Bulletproof Selling Show. And on this show, what we do is help salespeople remove hope from how they sell so that they can serve more. Selling more is great, but if that doesn't come with the background of service and the intention of service, then you might put a lot of revenue through your pipeline, but you won't be able to deliver on it. Those customers will not refer you to other customers like them. And of course, you won't have a sustainable business. So here at Bulletproof Selling, since day one, we've been bringing on people to help salespeople remove hope from how they operate. Folks that have been best-selling authors, Hall of Fame speakers, folks that are leading international sales teams, and those that are helping salespeople on the front lines better prospect, drive great conversations, deliver more value, and of course, serve more on the tail end as well. Out of every one of these episodes, we build a sales system alongside our guests that you can use no matter the size of your team or the size of your goals. And across all the systems that we get to build here at Bulletproof Selling, 140 plus episodes, there's 140 sales systems. They're all available for you for free over at battlefieldselling.com. The one system that tends to get overlooked a lot are not the systems we use for finding out, your particular problems at your company if you're the prospect. They aren't the systems we use for driving better conversations. They aren't the systems that we use for closing deals faster. The most overlooked systems are the ones that happen before we ever reach out to the prospect in the first place. Because believe it or not, and maybe it's not so hard to believe, coming from a military background, getting to watch the highest performing teams on battlefields all over the world, intelligence is what allowed us to operate it efficiently. And when I say intelligence, I'm not talking about Mensa level IQ scores. Very few of the people that I got to serve with, you would fall into that category. What we were exceptional at doing, though, was gathering great intelligence and leveraging it. And that way, we didn't have to have Mensa level intelligence on the front lines. We could take the stuff we were given, the strategy, the execution, the mission plan, and we could move the ball forward down the field faster than our opponents. And in sales, you've got opponents, whether it's the calendar of your prospect that's already full or whether it's your competition. So today's guest, we're going to dive into this idea of the most powerful system you might be able to build to remove hope from how you operate is the system that comes in before you ever reach out to a prospect. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. I know I'm going to learn a lot from it. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show today, Mr. Bob Scarperi. He is the co-founder and managing director of Revenue Vision Partners. New book out, all about the topic that we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, Bob, welcome, sir, to Bulletproof Selling.
Such a pleasure to be here, Sean. Thank you so much. First of all, I appreciate your service. And I really am a big fan of the platform and the show, and I love everything you stand for. So I'm really thrilled to be here today.
Thank you, sir. It's good to have you. I know that you are a systems-driven salesperson and a sales advocate. So we already have that in common. I know we're going to have a great conversation. Anybody that goes to your LinkedIn profile is going to see that you've been in the world of sales for quite some time. Walk us through that sales journey, what got you into sales, always a cool story to hear from somebody, and what you get to do today to serve salespeople.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So my sales career started back in the early 90s with ADP. One of my best friends growing up, his dad was the top sales guy at ADP. And I just remember being in their house and seeing all the sales awards and just having the utmost respect for this guy and how much conviction he had in everything that he did. And he became, such a personal mentor of mine. So I spent the first 7 years of my career at ADP. And then I had the pleasure of going right from there to DoubleClick, which is kind of became the advertising engine of Google as it stands now. I did a long stint in equity research sales for AllianceBernstein, which was a phenomenal organization. I got to travel all over the world and open up offices in really exciting markets far afield. And then I had 3 CRO stints at high growth technology companies before I really started to realize that, the key to really accelerating sales growth was data, utilizing data well in order to figure out that ideal customer profile to score and rank upsell and cross-sell opportunities and prospects. So I bet my life on Revenue Vision Partners with a great business partner, and here we are today.
And at Revenue Vision Partners, I know you mentioned data. How do you all help salespeople sell more and serve more by leveraging data? Talk us through that process.
Yeah, so we are lucky enough to be working with some of the best private equity firms in the world who have recognized our VP as an organization who can quickly come in and analyze account data to develop patterns on what are the traits and characteristics of a company's best customers
Mm,
so that we can figure out, again, what are their best upsell and cross sell opportunities? How much white space is there left in accounts where you've already got a contract? And that can be all across the world of business services. It doesn't necessarily need to be technology or software, it can be really any B2B sale. And then what prospects should you be focused on with your sales talent, your systems, and resources?
awesome. So if a company is looking to engage with you all, what is the thing that they are probably suffering from in the way of hope? I know a lot of salespeople, they love good intelligence when they can get it, but where does hope enter the picture in a way that your company helps them solve?
Yeah, Sean, and look, it's we're in a good place in the world in that there is so much high quality B2B data available that the problem then becomes it's overkill. So they
Mm,
go to the interfaces of, it could be Zoom Info, Dun& Bradstreet, Apollo.io, and they are hoping that when they put in a filtering string, the thousands and thousands of prospects that come back to them, they are hoping that because there is such a high volume of accounts that come back, the law of large numbers is just going to result in great leads. And it doesn't,
mm,
because they use
mm.
the same approach with tens of thousands of prospects as opposed to a really bespoke approach with a smaller number.
So you're saying to reverse this equation that so many salespeople have learned to use, which is I'm going to feed filters into a search engine, whether that's Salesforce, whether it's Zoom Info, whether it's Sales Navigator. I'm going to get back a group of people. That's going to be my lead list. They've been qualified by job title, maybe time in industry, geography, maybe a couple other factors. And those are the people I'm going to pursue. That's the regular formula that most salespeople are used to. You're saying
Yes.
to switch some things around inside that formula in order to get more of our best type of customers, which is to first source our lead list against data and then produce names, companies across industry, and that gives us the people that are already ideally suited for what we're selling. That's an interesting formula to go about. So, in the companies you've been able to help this actually produce results in, what are the things that you notice the salespeople are hoping about less? Where do they see more time free up in their lives? Are they able to conduct more outbound? Does conversion happen a lot faster? Sell me on the equal sign in that equation and how this helps.
Yeah, it's such a great question. So, because of the problem that I described with an organization and maybe an individual salesperson or a territory manager having thousands of prospects that they're pursuing, they don't gain an understanding in detail of what that ideal customer looks like. What are the pains that they're experiencing? And when we are able to build a model that reveals the traits and characteristics of that ideal customer profile, they get a much more granular understanding of what those accounts look like, what industries they're in, what size they are, how much revenue they produce. Are they growing? Are they shrinking? What word strings are on their website? What pains and problems are they experiencing? When they know the answers to those questions, they pursue a much smaller set of prospects with a much more customized and passionate approach. They
Mm.
have so much more conviction that that smaller group is the right fit for their solution. And, they're not going to stop until they get a meeting, until they gain an audience with the right decision makers.
This goes against the grain of what a lot of salespeople are taught, that sales is a volume game, and you're saying it's not necessarily that less or that more equals more. In fact, it's less equals more if we're pursuing the right folks. Something that I see a lot of salespeople ask about is, Sean, I've got these couple of key accounts. If I could replicate these folks 1,000 times, my life would be a dream. They have great budget. They're very responsive. They understand the problem that we solve. I don't have to sell them on it, whatever that problem is. And you're saying that you can leverage data to make that happen on the front end rather than go through 1,000 accounts to hit those 2 or 3 real dream customers on the tail end.
Yeah. So, Sean, it comes down to really 2 things that we prioritize. And I think it's really hard to argue with these 2 things. Number one, revenue potential, right? So when you make that sale, what is the potential size of that deal, whether it be ARR or a one-time deal? What is the potential size? And then fit score, right? What does the right account look like? Again, in terms of firmographic, technographic traits, web scraped word strings, what is the fit score of that account and that revenue potential? And when you know that, we recently had, I'll tell a quick story. We recently had an engagement where our client was going after about 150,000 prospects. Woo. Once we got done with our exercise, our highest tier of revenue potential and fit score resulted in about 220 prospects. So they now know what, very small percentage of those prospects are going to be the highest fit for their solution. And so the approach that they are taking and the passion at which they are pursuing those sets of decision makers is so much higher. And they're so much more effective in getting first meetings and progressing through the sales process.
And that's something that people use data for to produce a lead list. But what they haven't really talked about a lot anyway, in all the organizations I get to coach, is using that data to then prioritize that list. And you're saying data can be used for that effect. So let's build a sales system around this, Bob, because I know this is something that everybody's interested in doing, getting more of those ideal types of clients in their pipeline, folks they love dealing with, folks that love dealing with them, because that's always better than trying to bang the phone 1,000 times to get to that one person. So in the military, every new system that we put into place removed a little more hope from how we operated. And I find the same thing to happen in sales. So if we're trimming hope away, let's use a military acronym, TRIM. The T in TRIM is the trigger. So if I'm a salesperson now, and I've got access to a couple of platforms, a lot of salespeople do, but I've only used those platforms to throw at a couple of filters just to get me that lead list of 1,000 people. When am I going to trigger a system that allows me to recreate my best customers? Does that happen before I'm conducting outreach? Does it happen even in development of my ICP? Does it happen at the beginning of each quarter or with a product launch? When would you recommend a salesperson ideally trigger this system to leverage data to create more of their ideal clients?
It's one of these, when is the best time to plant a tree kind of question, Sean, right? I mean, I think any sales organization needs to gain this understanding foundationally. So if you haven't done it, 20 years ago or today, right now, go through this exercise of building a model that shows the best traits and characteristics of your ideal customer profile. And I would say for most sales organizations, it needs to be updated roughly quarterly or every 6 months.
And we're going to dive into that later in this acronym for sure. So let's talk about building the model then. I know that this is a process that your company walks or other sales teams through. So let's keep it at the high strategic level here. We don't need to dive too deep in the weeds. But what would you say the 4 or 5 steps are that it takes to build this model of what my ideal customer really looks like so that I can fill my pipeline with more of them? What are those 4 or 5 steps I need to follow consistently every quarter as I take a look at this?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, when you do the process, the foundational process, we are using advanced analytics tools, specifically Alteryx, with workflows that quickly determine what the common traits of those top accounts are. Some organizations have the ability to do that internally. If you don't, I'd recommend a firm who does this on a regular basis. We are one of a few who are very good at this process. If you have a data scientist on staff, I'm sorry?
Oh, I was going to say, what are the top things those firms are looking for? So if I'm a salesperson operating and my sales manager says, yeah, we don't have the budget for that, what's maybe 1 or 2 things that I can look for amongst my key accounts that would allow me to replicate this just at a very basic level?
Yeah, I'd probably get very serious about understanding the industries, the most common industries that of their best clients,
Okay.
right? Are they telecom services companies? Are they in refining? Are they legal services companies? From the industries and subsectors, Sean, I'd probably go to size next, right? What is their
Mm.
annual revenue or number of employees? If you can at least figure out those two things, you can start with the basics of a pretty decent model.
Okay, so I've got employees and potentially revenue. And then what are the other things I need to be either looking for in these companies or planning for next steps in? Because if I know that my best firms are in construction and I know they're between 500 million and $100 million in revenue, whatever that looks like, and that they usually have between, I don't know, 500 and 700 employees. So I can get that specific because I can look at my existing accounts and say, what are the things in common? But what do I need to begin doing with that data, or if there's anything else I need to research that will allow me to fill my pipeline with more of them?
Well, yeah, from there you could build cohorts, right? So what are the relevant breakpoints of those groups of accounts who are in those sectors and subsectors who have that amount of annual revenue and or number of employees, and then start to understand in a fully penetrated account, what is the total deal size of the biggest accounts I have in those cohorts so that you can understand revenue potential.
Mm, okay. Revenue
The
potential.
process
And
is
then
not
that,
an easy, it's not an easy DIY, to be
no,
frank,
it doesn't
Sean.
sound like it. This is why
Yeah.
people hire companies like yours. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So
Yep. But it,
if
you
I'm
know,
getting this far into the process and I've gotten down to the industry, the size by employees and revenue, and the total deal sizes, I have to identify the available market of these types of companies, which will then allow
that's
me
right.
to determine potential revenue. Okay,
That's right.
so available market or companies that kind of match that criteria.
That's right.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. And if I've gotten this far into it, at what point do I begin to actually engage the regular data collecting tools that my company is probably using at the beginning of this equation? Does that need to happen at all, or is there a point where I've identified the available market of these ideal customers? Now I can begin researching the tactical outreach elements.
Yeah, I mean, no, once you've got those traits and characteristics that you feel confident match the ideal customer profile, then you can engage those platforms. And
Okay.
they can either do
Awesome.
this for you through the interface or in a kind of custom download.
Gotcha. That's where I get those platforms like Zoom Info. I need names, I need email addresses of these people. So now that I've got the type of company, I've identified the exact companies that fit that model, that criteria, and now I can move forward into outreach. So I'm
Yeah.
curious then, because I know that you follow your clients further far enough down the pipeline to be able to see the results in this. What am I going to do differently in outreach now that I know that I'm hitting that list of 221 prioritized companies that meet all of this criteria? Does my outreach change? Does what I do at the beginning of that sales cycle shift at all?
Yes. You can then start to build custom demand gen plays that
Mm,
map to these cohorts that I described. So when you understand the sectors and subsectors that you are selling to and the company size, you will understand the types of problems that these organizations are having that you can talk to in your outreach.
mm.
And you can reference how your organization is uniquely suited to start solving those problems. The other
And
thing
of
that
course,
I see happen
yeah.
is they go after more decision makers in the ones that they know have the best potential.
Mm, interesting. Okay. And that's something that I want to put a pin in because we're going to hit that in the later stages of this systems build, which is what we're going to track. But I'd be willing to bet that if I'm a salesperson and I know I'm reaching out to someone that is ideally suited, and this is something that you mentioned in this exact process. I remember Brian Tracy, sales legend. He had a part in one of his keynotes that he gave where he said, this is back in the 80s before this was a possibility. It's a possibility now with what you're talking about. But he would say, imagine that you could leverage artificial intelligence to determine the exact companies that you could reach out to inside of a given hour and get 100% conversion. And he would say, how many calls would you make inside of that hour? And salespeople, like, how many, could I have 60, 120? If I could just call and make a sale, how many times would I bang the phone and how fast? You're absolutely right. If I know as a salesperson that I'm reaching out to a company that has been vetted against this type of criteria, they're already matching all the indicators of an ideal prospect. Yeah, I'm going to call them more. I'm going to reach out to them more. I'm going to provide more value, of course, because I know I don't have as many barriers I have to break down and things I have to match up. So this is brilliant. I've got this repeatable element in place then. The iron trim, which you touched on a little earlier, is how am I going to improve this over time? You said that this is not something to do once every decade and then let it play. You said to revisit this every quarter, maybe even sooner. How am I going to improve the ideal customer profile I have that I'm using data to put together?
In really high volume organizations, Sean, we're tracking response rates of all of their outbound efforts, and we're tweaking and refining those models relative to the response rates, both in demand generation and then stage to stage progression in sales process. And we may make adjustments to the model based on organizations from specific subsectors or sizes that are reacting better to that outreach and that are progressing through the sales funnel more quickly.
That's interesting. So you're saying that pipeline velocity, how fast we're moving deals through the stages, you're tracking that in order to even further refine what an ideal customer looks like. And so at the tail end of that, maybe I don't have 220 being popped out of your algorithm. It's only 60. But those 60 we know are going to rocket ship themselves through our sales process. That's powerful stuff, man.
This, in previous generations, this may have just been referred to as account segmentation.
Yeah.
My partner Chris and I referred to it now as agile segmentation. The model learns from experience.
Because it's iterative. Yes. I'm very familiar with it. We use it in the military. It's how we stay alive in some of these very dangerous environments. So if I've got trigger, repeatable, improvable, the M in this is measurable. And you mentioned earlier, it's something I wanted to bring back into this conversation. I don't just want to measure the velocity of these deals through the pipeline, which is a great thing to measure. You probably would. But you said that measure something interesting, which was how many more outreach attempts, how much more engagement are my salespeople conducting?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in the data and diagnosis driven selling book, one of my co-authors is the most credible human I've ever met in benchmarking. And in the book, we go through every possible way to measure the success of your outreach and sales processes. And I think if you were to evolve your model over time, Sean, you could call it TRIMA, to the last being for accountability.
Yeah.
So I really want to hold people accountable to the, effort and activity in those top accounts, because we know that there's going to be a better success rate.
Absolutely, they will. This is a really interesting way to look at leveraging data. So many salespeople tell me, Sean, I want more of my top accounts. How do I find them? How do I create them? I've been able to develop ways to do that after we actually close business with one of those accounts. But you're saying, you can do it on both ends. Not only can you capture your top accounts and ask them for more people like them, you can go to the beginning of the sales cycle and make sure that of the 1,500 people that might match that ideal client list, you can really segment them down into a tight group that are going to rocket ship their way through your sales process because they've already been vetted. They have the challenges that you can help solve. They already know that they have the challenges that you can help solve. That's an easy sale. One that allows you to get on board with serving them a lot faster. So Bob, I know you have a platform behind this. I want to give people an opportunity to get into it, try it out. How do they connect with you? How do they connect with the company? And how do they get a copy of this book?
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. So our company, as you mentioned, is called Revenue Vision Partners. I'm on LinkedIn, Bob Scarperi. And my email is bob@revenuevp.com, but you'll see me all over LinkedIn. And the book, Data and Diagnosis Driven Selling, available at all the major outlets. And the chapter relative to this conversation that I'd reference is chapter 3, which is, understanding and building your ideal customer profile model.
Amazing. So this is just one chapter out of that book. If you got a lot out of this conversation, imagine what the rest of those chapters might hold for you as a salesperson or as a sales leader. Great pitch, Bob. Appreciate that. This is a good time, man. For those of you that want to connect with Bob, we'll make sure that we're tagging him in the comments as this releases across all the platforms. If you are watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe into that live stream channel. And if you're listening on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, leave us a review and let other salespeople know. Yes, hope does enter the picture, but it doesn't have to stay there. So make sure other salespeople know with bulletproof selling and good systems, you too can sell more and serve more. Bob, thanks for serving the sales community one more time with us on this show. And let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
It's such a pleasure. I appreciate your energy. And more than anything, I appreciate your incredibly thoughtful questions.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.